Good morning and welcome to another video cast from Hendy Consulting, the specialist management consulting firm for the $150 billion display industry. Well, today I wanted to give you my thoughts on the recent AR VR conference organised by DSCC. And actually, fundamentally, the overriding feeling I had was of a marketplace that's probably 3 to 5 years behind micro LED in the way that there are still too many technology options and technology choices. And so this is a question for me about market maturity. At the beginning, you'll get all sorts of technology owners aiming to focus on the market space. And that's what we're seeing at the moment. We're seeing at least 5 to 7 different display technologies. And then beyond that, absolute myriad of optics companies trying to offer waveguides and assemblers then trying to pull all of these pieces together to form their AR and VR platforms. And I have to say, that means, I think, until there's somewhat of a shakeout and that there are 2 or 3 key winners in each place, that market growth will be more challenging until things are a little bit simpler. The other key theme that came across to me was just the role of semiconductor players now in this marketplace. So 200 and 300 millimeter wafers being used as CMOS backplanes and being used for epitaxy, and a range of other approaches from companies like Micledi and others to do hybridization, so that you've got now also with the semiconductor players coming into the marketplace, you've got the business models that from semiconductor players coming in too. So this whole notion of foundries and fabless is coming into the display market also in a way that it's never really been there before. And I find that fascinating in terms of how that will swing out. So very quickly, I just wanted to review some of the things that I found really the most interesting. The Gertech US presentation I found really nicely written, and a very sort of simplification, but very nicely written on the product specs and requirements for both AR and VR. Sony did a really good job of outlining just how many different optic solutions there are today. And that really blew my mind in terms of the choices that people are trying to have to work out. I identified again the theme that's been coming through since 2022 of the role of mono-emitting platforms. So say Porotech and their tunable buffer layer for all in-GaN processing. But also it was nice to see Seth O'Sullivan talk about NS Nano wires, NS Nano talking about their nano wires, where actually the color's tunable based on the geometry of the vertical wires. And they're actually giving very narrow full width half max, which he claims makes coupling into waveguides much more accurate. And that seemed a really fascinating thesis to me. IQE was trying to position themselves as a leading sort of merchant epitaxy supplier, and that really came through. And I also found the presentation from Butrix on the role of what a semiconductor company can do when they start trying to design backplanes. So then it was really much more than just achieving display driving. They had they're trying to also do sub-pixel rendering. They're trying to do different driving schemes. They're trying to do sub-area driving so that you only have certain parts of the drive scheme activated if you only want to do, say, icons in a certain part of the display. And that was fascinating to me that once you decouple that and say the driver in the background can be on silicon, that then some different choices, more sophisticated choices could be made. So overall, the fundamental feeling I had was this of market immaturity. There are still too many technical options, and some of this will have to break out and swing out into some leading camps for this to really go in a forwards direction. And so I think Guillaume does an amazing job of trying to then put together some sort of forecast. And his forecast has been fairly stable, with him now talking about $7 billion in 2027, with most of it in the VR and pass-through AR category. And he also tries to put out a technology view, which is OLED on silicon and LCD centric. But for me, that was one of the challenges, is that, you know, you have all of the myriad of participants trying to pitch their own relative technologies, be it OLED on silicon, and there were a number of players from that perspective, micro LED with Mojo presenting, but then also it still seems that LCOS projection is still, and laser beam scanning are still very much viable options in this space. So the shakeout hasn't happened yet with people aligning on specific things. Sony did a really good job of giving a categorization of all of the different optics and waveguides, and frankly all of this blew my mind with the range of choices that is still available. They also did a go at coupling these to some of the display technologies, but it's pretty clear that this is a really complex space where still quite a few technical choices trying to be made. The Gertech US presentation was nice in that, at least for VR, the presenter did a really good job of trying to talk about sort of some of the key target specs and where they might be moving, and I found that really helpful. Also, in the overview of that, and let me move myself for a minute, the overview of both marketplaces, top left here, the VR marketplace by price point and brand, top right, the AR glasses space also by price point and brand. Sort of nice to see an overview of who plays where in a way visually that really helped me at least start seeing where the key headset makers might be, because there certainly are a very large number of them, and so being able to sort of segment them out I thought was quite helpful. So this theme is still there, and this is one I've raised before, which is the role of sort of single mono emitter architectures. And while I think it's still got a way to go there, Porotech was again talking about their buffer layer for all in-GaN processing and their relationship with IQE, and then the Seth Coe-Sullivan talk on the role of their nanorods that are tunable in color by the size. And so then you can get a very narrow full width half max as well, which he claims really helps with coupling into waveguides. So I found that a fascinating notion. I think I've talked a little bit again on Viewtrix, and I found that again interesting in just what happens if you get a semiconductor player, then begin to think about how they can use the silicon space that sits below a OLED on silicon display, and what additional innovations then can end up in the silicon. And I think that certainly is something that we will see more of as the display industry investigates options like that. And IQE was nice to hear from them also in terms of the amount of capacity they're putting in place in Wales, but also the relationships they're beginning to form with the ecosystem. And I get the impression they're doing quite a good job of that, of reaching out to the most innovative companies in the space and putting in place channel partnerships. So that was definitely interesting. So overall, I mean, just the feeling I had was we're still at an early stage. Both on displays and on optics and waveguides, there are still too many choices. And that actually for the tool industry to know what to do to make mass production tools so that these things can move forward, what you actually want this is condensing into 2 or 3 leading platforms so that then people can actually know what they're going to invest against. And I think that is still ahead of us and hasn't happened yet. The other thing that was for me important, and I think I've tried to highlight that in this short talk, is the role of the semiconductor industry now in terms of introducing their own business models into displays. And I've always tried to argue to people from the semiconductor industry that there's no real reason for the display industry, which is largely vertically integrated, to start thinking about foundry concepts. No incentives, no behaviors, no understanding of that way of doing business, right? And yet now, because you're having the semiconductors joining this space, now you're getting some of those breakthroughs. And it will be really interesting to see whether that means now that you start getting more design houses and more foundry relationships in how this develops as the industry goes forward. So I hope you found that interesting, and stay tuned for other video podcasts.